Now, I may not have time to get through both tonight, but I would like to review KOTOR and KOTOR 2 separately because they, ignoring the fact that they were made by different companies and different teams and all that, they really were different feels, different styles of gameplay, which is ironic because BioWare and that relationship between BioWare and Obsidian is the same relationship that happened several years later between Bethesda and Obsidian, because and of course BioWare and Obsidian again with Neverwinter Nights to Neverwinter Nights 2. That's just sort of a thing that Obsidian always tend to do. And as I've said before, I do defend Obsidian because in my opinion they make great games. They don't make good game engines, and in fact tend to have bug issues, but they write a fantastic story and they write excellent plot. But we'll leave all that for KOTOR 2. Let's talk about the Knights of the Old Republic. Now, with the exception of TIE Fighter and that series and Rebellion, and to an extent the Dark Forces games. I'm not actually going to count them on this list. Those were passable. But aside from those two games, there were no truly great Star Wars games. And Star Wars was one of those settings, I should say, that really, in my opinion, should have had amazing games. It had potential ad infinitum, you know. It had amazing potential to be a setting for video games, and no one had really tapped it, except for X-Wing and TIE Fighter in that series, and Rebellion. And now I will, by the way, admit that Rebellion is a game that I personally loved, and I actually don't know anyone else who loved that game because it was so complicated, so involved, and so in-depth that very few people I knew had the mindset for that. I do actually have the mindset for that. When I actually sit down and really put my mind to something, you know, I can sort it out and mentally do all that, and it just kind of flows. I don't really think about it. Um, but aside from those games, Star Wars was just in this sort of drought of gaming. And in fact, a lot of really, really bad Star Wars games had come out, and a lot of only sort of bad Star Wars games came out. And so a lot of people said that Knights of the Old Republic is what ended that curse, because since Knights of the Old Republic, we've gotten a lot more better games ever since. You know, and obviously, I suppose. Knights of the Old Republic did something daring, too. It was something that had not been done before, even in the scope of the books, even in the scope of the extended universe of Star Wars at the time. No one had really gone back yet. Now, Lucas and Lucasfilms had stated, basically by writ law, that nobody could touch the Clone Wars series because he always had some intention to do that, or at least he wanted the option to do that, I should say. So they could mention the Clone Wars, but they never actually cover it, and that's why, in case anyone was wondering, they never did. It was always stuff from the future, from the point of the movies onwards. But rather than actually bothering with such a thing, excuse me a moment, where the heck is that noise coming from? Ah, well, whatever. Sorry about that. I thought I heard someone's phone going off. Regardless of that, the possibility of going back to the true Old Republic era, you know, not the recent Old Republic, the really Old Republic. The reason why we call it the Old Republic, you know, I guess it would be more accurate to call it the Republic era. Going way back was something that hadn't been done before, and it gave BioWare such a freedom of story design and motion and what they could do with the setting. You know, they could even use existing worlds and still and have just enough of familiarity with them while still making them feel completely new to us. A perfect example of that is Tatooine, which despite clearly and definitively being Tatooine, nevertheless, as you're going through there, just felt different and felt clearly, you know, like from a different era. It was immediately visible. It was immediately apparent, and that was extremely well done. You know, props. And that sort of freedom and openness and choice was the first fantastic decision, one of many, that led to KOTOR, which, again, is one of those absolutely best games of all time, in my opinion. Now, let's get this out of the way really quick. As usual, people tend to ask me, which do you prefer, blah or blah, of these two amazing games? I just talked about this in Baldur's Gate, with regards to Baldur's Gate 2 and Planescape Torment. I, personally, do like KOTOR 2 a little bit better than KOTOR 1. There are several reasons for this. It has to do with characterization and liking the specific style of the plot a little bit better. But KOTOR 2 also was plagued with problems, most of which had to do with budget and time, and the complete loss of an entire planet of content, and the destruction of the ending, because the ending was just destroyed. Now, granted, the original ending was going to be a little bit more of a downer, but as is, there basically isn't an ending. You know, you blow up and or do not blow up the thing, and the ship flies off, the end. And that was just so completely anticlimactic after what is otherwise an absolutely amazing game. It was devastating. It wasn't until many years later, actually quite recently, that I finally got into the whole, I can't think of the name, but the KOTOR 2 reproduction team, which is staffed by fans such as myself, who, no, I'm not on the team, I'm just saying people like me, or rather, I'm like them. Fans who know what they're doing got in and restored a lot of the code and a lot of the things that pieces that were missing from KOTOR 2, which helped a lot. But ultimately, KOTOR 1 and KOTOR 2 feel so differently that I don't like to compare the two of them. KOTOR 1 had a very growing epic feel and a very classically Star Wars feel to it. And this is key right here. This is how to do it right. Knights of the Old Republic is how you take a series that you love and manage to do a game or film or book or movie or whatever, or TV show, about that thing you love without going too far into being a fanboy and without trying to basically parrot it. You know, if I may make an example, there was a sequel done to Secret of Monkey Island, or Tales of Monkey Island. Gosh darn it. I can't remember the actual name of the sequel off the top of my head, which is why I'm getting confused. It was bad. I didn't like it. It was not very good. It was not very funny, and it was Tales. Okay, and it felt too much like they were just being fanboys. They were just gushing over the game rather than actually trying to take the idea, the concept, and do something with it. KOTOR is the exact opposite end of that. KOTOR actually took the ideal, the feel, the essence, the aura, the atmosphere, whatever you want to call it, of Star Wars, and managed to make a completely new game in a completely new era with different technology and different setting and different feel to it that still actually felt like Star Wars, which was quite a feat, I might add, and many props to the many people involved in that making that game for pulling that off. And that, in my opinion, is the reason why KOTOR worked, because people who were not Star Wars fans could play it and enjoy a good RPG, and people who were Star Wars fans could enjoy it and play a good Star Wars RPG. And it didn't feel too far in either of the direction, in either of the extremes. It was right there in the middle. It was an excellent game. Now, I haven't even really started talking about the game yet, have I? Let's talk about the some of the things that KOTOR did very right. First and foremost was the fact that they had in place a mystery. Oh, by the way, spoiler alert on this whole review, just right now. If you haven't played KOTOR, go play KOTOR right now. Stop watching this review. Go play KOTOR. Just seriously, go. Are they gone? Okay. Now that they're gone, the lead up to the reveal that you are actually Revan was a little bit broadcasted, but at the same time, it wasn't supposed to be a twist per se, in my opinion. Or if it was, it did not succeed really because it was broadcasted. But what it was a natural growth. I've talked about this before. The difference between a story that evolves and naturally changes and grows as it goes, or a story that has a twist or twists, and where those twists are just like, oh my god, I never would have guessed that, that kind of thing. And I could give you some examples, but you get the idea. KOTOR always felt more like a growth thing. Yes, of course you're Revan. It's broadcasted so often that you're amazingly gifted, and you could pull off things that people haven't in so long. And while some people may take that as writ because you are the player character, I tend to look at that in a good game. They will, and this applies to tabletop as well, which I do with my games as well. You don't just make the PCs have the potential to be the strongest people around. You actually make a reason for them to have the potential to be the strongest people around. You make a lore in character reason why they are the guys, or the guy in this case, or the girl as the case might be. My Revan was actually female, by the way, and my exile was male. Go figure. Um, Although in the second case, it was because I preferred the Handmaiden as a character over the guy whose name I can't even think of. Just my preference, I had nothing against him. I did play a female character just to check him out once and see how he was. And he wasn't a bad character. I just preferred the Handmaiden. But let's move on. I keep talking about KOTOR 2. Go away, KOTOR 2. I've got other things to talk about right now. The the establishment of you actually being Revan, the one who just changed the galaxy practically single-handed, makes perfect sense to demonstrate the fact that you, the player character, have the power to change the galaxy practically single-handedly. And having that sort of establishment for a player character is vital, in my opinion. in order to really demonstrate how you're pulling off these sort of things. Now, not all great games need to do that. Not to use an example, but Dragon Age never really explains why you, the warden, are the greatest guy around. You know, you certainly are talented, and of course you are a great warden. And I think my cable is stuck. My cable is stuck. There we go. Sorry if there was any fuzz just now. But you know, you were essentially just a Grey Warden. Now, granted, the Grey Wardens in general were kind of on the high end of the food chain in that setting, but let's move on. You being Revan was something I thought that was a magnificent stroke. It was a perfectly shaped puzzle piece that explained why you're the PC, why you care about what's going on, whether you are good or evil, and this is important. Whether you decided to be light side or dark side, you being Revan and your connection to Malak and the Starforge and Bastila is basically this. You're still having that connection, no matter which way you go. It was designed so that it would still make sense for your character to keep going through the adventure, and that is excellent storytelling right there. When you give the character and the player, by extension, motivation to keep playing regardless of the choices they make, that's good storytelling, and that's something KOTOR pulled off very well. Um, Speaking of which, speaking of the freedom of choice, to KOTOR, this is quite a compliment for anybody who knows me, for anybody who's watched my shows a lot. You know, I play good guys. I play good people. I play people who try to help the galaxy and save the galaxy and make things better, and you know, all that sort of thing. That's just my thing. That's all it has been. KOTOR is one of the very, very, very few games I have played an evil character in, because it was well written enough that, with a few exceptions, it never actually was stupid evil, and it was generally um, I get there are exceptions. Let's just get this out of the way. There are exceptions where it was just stupid evil. The worst example I can think of that was when you go to Korriban and you already know you're Revan, and there's so many dialogue options that are basically "Bow before me, I am Revan," which is just kind of dumb. But there were plenty of options to, you know, quietly and brutally manipulate everyone into destroying each other, and then just kind of laughing it off when they destroy each other and you reveal yourself casually and then wipe them out. That is my dark side Revan right there. Intelligent evil. If any of you read Order of the Stick, Tarquin. I may not. I'm not actually sure how that's pronounced because I've never heard it, obviously. But Tarquin, Elon's father, is my viewpoint of how to do an evil character properly, an intelligently evil character properly, and that's how I played my Revan. Now, there were some times where you didn't have that option, but it's also worth noting that in KOTOR, some of the times you were evil were absolutely hilarious. I don't remember if this is KOTOR 1 or KOTOR 2, but one of my favorite times. No, it was in KOTOR 1, wasn't it? Because okay, yes, it was. You're on Kashyyyk, and you talk to the. You find out that one guy has basically been forcing the other guy to work for him as a slave labor, and you. I'm not going to describe the scene actually, because you really got to see it to just look it up on YouTube sometime. Dark Side Kashyyyk, you know, you'll probably find it. But that scene was hilarious. That made me laugh so hard. There was another one on Nar Shaddaa. I believe this one was KOTOR 2, so forgive me, but this was the kind of thing I'm talking about. So I'm going to mention anyways. When two guys approach you and two bounty hunters are like, "Hey, you know, want our stuff?" And I was like, "You know, you should really jump off the cliff, or jump off the edge." Because Nar Shaddaa, if you don't know, is this city planet, and the platform you're on is like a couple miles in the air. And so you just kind of Jedi hand wave, "You should go jump off." And the guy says, "You know, that makes lots of sense. The quickest way to get to the ground would be to jump." And he just goes off and leaps off to his death. And I got a picture. This guy who's plummeting to his death. He is officially dead as of the moment he leapt over that edge. And the Jedi handwave wearing off, or him getting out of range, or simply him having enough time to think about it. And as he's plummeting for that would be at least a minute or two of plummeting. I think I'd have to do the math. I don't know what it is off the top of my head. And as he's just laying there thinking, he's like, "Why did I do this? What happened? Was that guy a Jedi? Gosh darn it! That guy threw me off. Ah! I'm so gonna die, but it's gonna be against the shit. There's nothing I can do." And he's just plummeting, just like, ah. And then, yeah. Anyways, I thought that was hilarious. Now, there was also, arguably, one of the second most evil thing I've ever seen in a video game in KOTOR 1, which was the official moment I finally formally swore to never play evil again. In fact, the other moment is from a later game, and I've never done it. I have simply found it by sheer accident on YouTube. I'm not even going to tell you about it. It's in Fallout 3. That's all I'm going to say. But the most horribly, horrifically evil thing that I've seen in a video game in a long while, second most horribly evil thing, was in KOTOR 1. So that is worth considering. but and it wasn't funny. I shouldn't even laugh. I'm not actually laughing because it was funny. It was terrible. It was horrible. I'm not. It has to do with. Oh shoot! I suddenly can't think of the name. The Twi'lek girl and the Wookiee. I can't think of anybody's names tonight. My goodness. You know what I'm talking about. And what you could do with them right before you go to the Starforge. And that's all I'm going to say about that. That was just screwed up. However, playing as Lightside on in KOTOR really was enjoyable to me. Not just because of the fact that you could help people, not just the fact that you were improving the worlds you were also going through in order to save, and trying to make the Republic and the galaxy by extension a better place through your actions, rather than simply stopping the evil threat, which KOTOR did do fairly well. Not as well as, say, Dragon Age, but it did do it. What I really enjoyed about playing Lightside was that there were two moments. I should, there's one moment, and then there's another thing that was just throughout the course of the game. Everyone called Revan this horrible, evil monster who just turned to the dark side and did all these horrible things and blah, blah, blah. And I never believed that, not even for a second. I'm glad to have been vindicated at last, by the way, by Tor in more recent years, that Revan really was never actually evil. Revan was a true Grey Jedi in the most awesome way possible. And I'm not even going into that because that's really getting into geek territory there, and I'm sure people are like, oh, what's a Grey Jedi? I don't even want to know. No, he was a Grey Jedi in the best possible way. And while he did make some mistakes, I keep saying he, even though mine was a she, playing as a good character, playing as a truly good individual, felt so rewarding simply because of the fact that everyone was expecting you to slip back to the dark side. They didn't even want you to be reconnected to the Force. They wanted to keep their eye on you. They wanted to cut you down if they had to. You know, there were so many people who were so afraid that you were going to turn back to evil, and you didn't. You saved them all. And you did it in style. And I loved it. I loved the fact that you could just prove, I guess, is what I'm going for. You could actually prove that good in this case did actually win out, that it survived, that you endured, that you never actually sank back to the level of what they expected you to, because you were, in your heart, a good individual, not a light individual. I want to stress that. Because there is a difference between good and light side and dark and evil. And yes, I know that Lucas would have you believe otherwise, but I'm sorry. I don't care what Lucas says on that matter. There's too much evidence in all the books and all the games, up until like 5 years ago when he laid down that law, that light and good are not the same thing, and dark and evil are not the same thing. But Revan was a good person, is my point I'm trying to get to here. And that really came across in your actions and throughout the game, and I loved that. And so there is one moment I really want to stress. Now, I mentioned how I don't do romances. There's one exception. Well, there's actually two exceptions. One would be Liara, as I mentioned. But this is the other exception. And it's not because I felt any romantic connection to Bastila. No. It's not because I really wanted to see two characters on a video screen get together. I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is nothing even approaching a sex scene. There is off-screen kissing, which is about as raunchy as KOTOR gets, which is fine, by the way. I actually have no problem with that. But none of that is why I did that romance. The full reason I did that romance was, which is funny because that turned out to be canon, was because not only did it make perfect sense, but it did something that I personally have believed for a long time. Now, I'm going to go ahead and go turn on full geek mode here for a moment, okay? So, I'm just giving you guys a warning. I have long since believed the fact that the Code of the Jedi, most especially those of the Old Republic, and this really comes out in the prequel movies too, in a quote-unquote good way, because they are proven to be wrong in the prequels, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The Code of the Jedi, the whole, I actually don't remember what it is off the top of my head. The whole code, there is a whole code that you actually recite, peace is, this peace will have this, and the Force will give me the way, and emotion is the enemy, all that stuff. What it preaches, this came out a lot in the books too, is essentially a really ridiculous form of pacifism, and it has always bothered me immensely, because I have always felt that power should be used to help people. And you can say that, yes, people can be corrupted by doing that, and you're absolutely right. But it is also true that some people, and this has been proven in real life and in fiction, that some people are simply good people, and those people will not fall into that temptation. They will try to help and continue to help, and you need power of some type, whether it's resources, whether it's money, which technically is resources, whether it's actual power in the terms of fantasy setting, whether it's the ability to help, or simply knowledge, whatever that power comes in, because power just means the ability to do. That is all power is, the ability to do. So you need some kind of power in order to help people. It's required. And to have the level of power that a Jedi can wield within that setting, and to intentionally go out of your way to try not to use it, and to intentionally go out of your way to try and discourage yourself from loving, and to discourage yourself from caring, and to detach yourself from the world you are trying to help. And it strikes me as so incredibly, almost hypocritical. God, I can't talk tonight. It strikes me as so wrong. I'm just going to say it. Wrong. It's almost an abuse of the power by not using it. Yes, I understand the fears. Yes, I understand the problems involved. You're still going too far the other direction. And that's the key right there. They are themselves behaving as extremists by performing the extreme version of what they attempt at balance, ironically enough. But it is still an extremism. It is still going too far the other way. Now that all that's out of the way, one of the things that was big at the time, especially because the prequel movies had come out, or I guess only episode 1 had come out at the time. I think episode 2 had come out by that point. I'm actually not sure. I know episode 2 had come out before I actually played KOTOR, because I didn't get into it until Gary gave me his copy. So, one of the things that had been big, and the books were going into this too, was the whole, we are not allowed to love, we are not allowed to care, love leads to the dark side, blah, 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 right? It was the ultimate moment of triumph for my personal way of thinking that made me actually throw up my hands in the air and say, yes! Yes! That what saved Bastila Shan from the dark side was not drivel, was not some kind of speech, it was not rhetoric, it was not you chanting some damn code, it was you saying to her point blank, without hesitation or fear, I love you. And getting her to admit that she had been afraid of the fact that she felt it back, and getting her to realize that there was nothing wrong with that. And that is what redeems her and gets her back to herself and rids her of the dark side. That was awesome. And in my opinion, one of those great moments, one of the best moments. There's few moments in games that just absolutely stand out, and that's one of them in my opinion. That just is a sparkling gem of amazingness, of emotion, of impact, of depth, of long-term consequence. And indeed, that there was a lot of long-term consequence. Let's be honest, Tor would have turned out very differently if that scene hadn't gone that well, because we know at this point that scene is canon because of Tor, which I didn't really expect at the time. I thought that wouldn't be canon, actually. I'm surprised they turned it. But I'm amazed, I'm gratified, because that was so correct, in my opinion. And I'm going to stop being a super geek now. I'm going to rein it back. Let's go back to talking about how awesome KOTOR is. I should take note of the time here. 23 minutes. Let's actually make a note here so I can put a timestamp. If you want to skip the super geek section, go to 23 minutes. Okay. The combat in KOTOR was not the best thing in the world. I'll admit that freely. Sorry for kind of a shift from most amazing moment ever to, it was kind of okay. But the combat was passable. The only reason I really liked the combat in KOTOR was two reasons. One, I thought the animations were actually well done. It actually felt cool, as it should, to be using a lightsaber, to be dual-wielding a lightsaber, to be using a dual saber. That actually, could you use dual sabers in KOTOR 1? I don't remember. Well, either way, I dual-wielded in KOTOR 1. I dual-sabered in KOTOR 2, so whatever. Point being, it looked cool, you felt cool, you actually felt powerful, and again, I've mentioned this before, that balance point between being overpowered and being underpowered to the point, both of these being bad for their different reasons. KOTOR very much hit the sweet spot here, where you did feel like Revan, you did feel like the guy, but you were not abstractly laying waste to everything in your path to the point where it was meaningless. So again, but I mentioned that because that comes out in the combat engine well, because even though you're jumping around doing things that would make Luke Skywalker just go, you still managed to feel a degree of moderation in it. It never felt over the top. It never felt ridiculous, if you know what I mean. It never felt like gosh, I don't know. I can't think of an example off the top. It never felt too much. It never felt excessive. It never felt like Metal Gear Solid Revengeance. There you go. That's what we're gonna go with. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I applaud you. Now, that combat engine, I have to add one other thing. The real reason that was tolerable, the real reason that it was the second reason, I guess I should say, but the biggest reason was because of the pause feature. If they didn't add that, that combat would have been simply too hectic, too difficult, too much to take care of. I'm glad they did that. For those who don't know, that's been a feature in Bioware games for quite some time, all the way back to Baldur's Gate, as I just talked about. Actually, I don't think I mentioned that, but anyways, point being, that is something that has been a feature for forever. And they really learned that lesson in Neverwinter Nights, because you could play Neverwinter Nights from the KOTOR perspective. You could pull the camera down and go to the third-person perspective rather than the top-down thing. And doing so basically required you to use the pause button every now and again to target things and to be like, okay, hang on, this spell, this location, okay, I need you to attack him, that kind of thing. And while I may not necessarily agree that that's the best combat system, I will freely admit that having in that combat system the pause button was basically required. Now, there's one other thing I wanted to mention briefly here, and I don't know why this just came to mind, but I do want to mention this. One of the things that I thought that KOTOR did very well was come out on the Xbox. That's going to sound weird, because, as you know, I don't own an Xbox, and never have, and I sincerely doubt I ever will at this point, or rather, an Xbox and Xbox 360. There might be future Xboxes I buy, I'm just saying. For the reasons I mentioned, and this is a game, in case you're wondering, yes, I played it on the PC, obviously, I guess. But I think it was a good thing that it came out on the Xbox because the Xbox needed really good RPGs to really fill out its catalog, in my opinion. And if I'm not mistaken, I could be mistaken. Feel free to correct me on this. But KOTOR was one of the first Western RPGs that really was on the Xbox. And from that, we got the Mass Effects and the KOTOR 2, the Dragon Ages. All those came out on Xbox thereafter as a resultant of that, and therefore the Xbox got access to all these excellent games, which is great, which is an excellent thing, and which should happen. And so I think that was a great move. Whoever broadcasted that or whoever decided to make that decision made a good decision, in my opinion. And those games and those types of games translate surprisingly well, in my opinion, between console and PC. The only real difference, ultimately, is on the PC you have this, which admittedly is something I basically require in gaming. This right here is a big reason why I play games on the PC as a preference, because of the mouse. But also you had more key options, and that's basically it at that point. You don't have to change too much, especially not at the time, between graphics or the actual engine or anything like that. And so, wonderful move, great idea. Next thing I want to talk about is the characters. KOTOR is another of those games that did not have a single party member I did not like to some extent or another. I can't remember any of their names, of course, because I'm amazingly retarded. But let's just go through them. Bastila Shan, again, another example of the character that I hated the moment she opened her mouth. I just wanted to slug her, because she was just this uppity, prissy, oh, I just saved you. I'm sorry, I just ran around for the last 5 hours trying to save you. I'm sorry, trying to find you and then save you because you were down here with a slave collar over your neck, you twit. And again, going from that point to the awesome, incredible scene I mentioned earlier, and actually caring about that scene, me, the person here, actually caring about Bastila enough to want that scene to happen so she can be redeemed, that again, is an excellent example of character growth and how exactly that should be done. And again, I have no idea when that changed, but that she certainly did soften over time. And if I could actually probably identify it a bit easier in her case, it's about the time she started questioning the dogma of the Jedi Council and started actually, thinking for herself rather than accepting rhetoric as writ law, and which is something I disagree with in general in any concept, in any setting, and in real life. But let's move on. But when she started to actually start thinking for herself and really started to express that and be honest with you, I think that's when her character really started to take off and we really started to see who Bastila Shan actually was. Now, other characters, I'm going to look this up. I'm sorry to keep doing this, but I really don't want to disservice this by just being like, yeah, Old Republic. Except it's not said Republic. That's not how it's called. Okay. Carthonasi. God, how could I forget that name? Carthonasi was awesome. Carthonasi was the perfect. He wasn't actually was another thing that they had done that is rare, because Star Wars games, even to this day, and especially before that, usually had an equivalent for, Leia, Han, and Luke, and occasionally Obi-Wan, right? There was usually that equivalent or that parallel character. Carth Onasi wasn't a parallel to anybody. Carth Onasi was Carth Onasi. He was a soldier. He was a career soldier. He believed in the Republic, even though he understood it was wrong. Or I'm sorry, not wrong. He understood it wasn't perfect. He understood that there were flaws in the system, but he was still a honorable, decent man who was a career soldier who believed that at least the system can work, and I'm still going to uphold it. And I liked that. I really liked that. He was not a yes sir, blind faith kind of guy. He was an optimist, and it showed so much in his character. And one of my favorite sections for him is when if you stay dark side towards the end, you get one final chance to turn back. You know why this is true whether you're male or female. You get one final chance to turn back to the light. That is when Carth Onasi himself comes out and says, "I believe in you. I believe you're not going to cut me down." And you know what? I have never played dark side past that point. I'm not kidding, because I could not bring myself to crush that man's optimism. That kind of hope should be rewarded, in my opinion, in my honest to God opinion. And so I couldn't bring myself to do anything other than say, "You're right, Karth. I can't cut you down, and I'm not going to. You're right about me." You know, I really had there was just there was this bond there. I loved Karth. He was awesome. He was the first Alistair, if I could put that way. Obviously Alistair was a little bit more fleshed out and a little more interesting of a character, a little more depth given to him. But definitely that same feeling of just that guy who's just yes, that's awesome. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm babbling a bit. T3M4. I had to look that one up again. Of course, I'm staring at the list right now, but even if I didn't, I would have to look up the droid thing, because he was a very wait. Am I thinking the right droid? Hang on, just a moment. That is the droid I'm thinking of, right? Yeah, that's him. That's the astromech droid. That is the astromech droid who, as per usual, had a bit of a quirky personality, but it came off in just the right way to not be annoying, but actually was still endearing, if you know what I mean. He was not an irritant. He was more of a ha or an aw, and I liked that. Next quick character, of course, is HK47. And I gotta admit, even as a good character, even as me as a person, I thought HK47 was hilarious, and I cannot help but express how absolutely awesome HK47 was. And the reason he was so awesome, this is hard to pin down. In my opinion, the reason HK47 is so awesome and is withstood so long in the minds and memories of gamers is because he was so British. And what I mean by that is he was talking about things not in a British accent, not with that chipper tone, but he was so dry about it. He was so, actually, dry is not the word I want. He was so flat. He was so, I can't do it. I can't do his voice at all. But I can't do that kind of level of voice when I'm so enthusiastic as I am right now. But just completely level. And then I don't know what happened. I walked up to his mistress to shoot her as programmed, and he leapt in front of her, which of course made it so that I killed him, and then I deactivated. I do not understand why he did that. And the whole thing was just. He says it was such the perfect poise to it, and every now and again he'll do something horribly evil or even very good. You could actually do this is why I liked HK47 really. You could still do good acts, and HK would just say, "Oh, well, I suppose we will be helping these people, but I'm not worried, because I know as soon as we leave town, 7 foolish meatbags will attack us, and then I will get the chance to properly expend my skills on them." And it was just yes, I loved it. Let's scroll down. Mission. That was her name. That was the name of the Twi'lek, and I liked Mission. This is another example of a character that started out a bit annoying, but was annoying for a good reason. Given her backstory, given how she grew up, given where she grew up, it is entirely understandable that she would be very defensive, that she would be very, leave me alone, very loner, and she grew as well. She developed to the point where she was, again, an optimist, and she's the other character who says, "I don't think you can do this." And and then actually that's another point that I had to actually have someone else force the screen forward, by the way, because I couldn't bring myself to do it. And when it happened again with Karth, I was like, okay, I'm not doing this anymore, and I reloaded my save. Anyways, and I said, "Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right, Mission. You are right about me. I am a good person." Let's go be good together because to hell with this dark side stuff. I'm sorry. I liked being a side character in KOTOR. What can I say? I liked Mission a lot. She was a very she was again, she started off irritating, she grew on me. She grew in general, and she got to the point where instead of just being this little chipper, annoying kind of character, she turned into this rather upbeat almost. Intelligent though. Intelligent, upbeat, not quite fatalistic so much as understands exactly how bad things are and refuses to let that get to her, and I like that. Zalbar, of course, was the Wookiee involved, and I just mentioned, or rather, I mentioned a bit ago. Zalbar I liked because Zalbar was an excellent example of a Wookiee done properly, because Chewbacca was always a bit of a rogue. Chewbacca was always the exception. He's like Spock. Spock is not a Vulcan. Spock is Spock. Just like Chewbacca, is Chewbacca. He is not truly a Wookiee in the traditional sense of the word. Zalbar, by contrast, showed us what a real Wookiee is actually like, and it was an excellent insight into the personality of the species, and I thought it was really well done. Juhani is also amusing because Juhani is an excellent example of how easy it is within the setting to fall in and out of the dark side. How narrow that line is. How easy it is to dip your toe right over the edge and then dip it right back. And Juhani as how do I put this? She It is. I will admit freely that I wish they had done more with Juhani. In fact, if I'm remembering properly, they didn't. They were intending to, and they never got around to it for programming and code reasons and time and money, as usual. But Juhani had potential, and that's why I liked her. She never actually did anything. I'll freely admit that. But she had so much potential that she could have actually done something. That they could have done something with that. But let's move on to who is arguably my favorite character of the bunch. Yes, Carthonasi was awesome. Yes, Bastila was awesome. Yes, Mission was awesome. Jolie Bindo was the pinnacle of awesome. I think Jolie Bindo is technically the first, as far as the first one we are introduced to, actual canon grade Jedi in the history of ever. Granted, Revan himself was eventually revealed to be a true Grey Jedi as well, but that was later. That was actually after KOTOR came out, and they started hammering out the canon of what actually happened for KOTOR 2 and for the books and stuff. Julie Bindo was the first Grey Jedi we ever got to encounter, and he was the perfect Grey Jedi. And everything he said, I was like, yes, I love this. I love the fact that he explains why he feels the way he does. He doesn't actually say, "Oh, they're wrong and because they're stupid," or "They're wrong because they're wrong," or whatever. He doesn't go into rhetoric himself. What he does is he actually explains why he feels the way he does, why he doesn't agree with the Jedi Council, why he doesn't agree with the Sith. You know, why he is right in the middle, and I agree with him so much. And and while again he pulled off that cantankerous old man, there's just this trend in KOTOR of characters starting out irritating and turning into awesome. He started off as just this cantankerous old man, and as you learn more about him and as you feel him out more, you really get to learn about the character, and he really starts to grow on you. And I especially like the fact that there was this hidden undercurrent, which is much more apparent the second playthrough, that he knew exactly who you were the moment you walked up, and because he either knew enough about what was going on or was quick enough on his feet to realize you had had some problems or some amnesiac or something like that, that he immediately, just like that, latched on and was like, yep, and just played along and went right along with it. And the whole time he was letting you figure things out for yourself. And if you play a good character, as I can tell you from experience, he is so pleased with the fact that despite the fact that the Jedi Council had basically condemned you to death, and despite the fact that they didn't want you trained again, and despite everything that they had said, and despite the fact that all the Sith were saying with all the rhetoric that you would turn back to the dark side and it was your true destiny, that they were both wrong. That you were simply a good person, and you proved it by virtue of your actions, not the color of your force. If you'll forgive me for putting it in such terms. I love that. All right. Okay, and I guess that's really all the major characters, but a lot of the NPCs really grow on me too. The the admiral who's Saul, wasn't it? It was something Saul. I liked him too. In fact, I bet it's right here. Scroll down a bit. Saul Karath, or Saul Karath, or whatever the heck his name was. Saul Karath was an appropriate. The voice acting, first of all, in Saul was actually amazing. Whoever did that voice, I guess I could look right here at the voice actor, which would be Whoops, I'm sorry, wrong line. Robin Socks. Anyways, no idea who that is. He did a fantastic job, though. He really sold that role, and it was surprisingly well done for someone who was ultimately, arguably, more evil than the other individuals involved. More evil than, for example, Malik. Now, I know that's a bit of preference. I know that's a bit of of opinion, but Malik was a blunt instrument who just ran around being stupid evil. He was destroy, destroy, I will use brute force to make my methods happen. Saul was insidious and screwed up and malicious and not malicious, that's not the word I want to use. He was sadistic. And he intentionally and deliberately and knowingly betrayed the Republic and his friends and just everybody and turned on them because he was an evil, horrible, screwed up guy, you know? Um, and that is why I say Saul is a more evil character than basically everyone else in that game. I don't know if there's another character I might be missing off the top of my head. We're talking about KOTOR 1 specifically here. But he had some issues, and it was a nice foil to put him, not foil, it was a nice contrast to put him right next to Malik, the blunt instrument, who again I think was done very well because Malik was exactly what happens when you get someone who is very powerful in the Force and bluntly turn them to the dark side. And what you have left is essentially a blunt instrument. It's just this giant thing that just waves around, destroying everything in its path. Inevitably will fail, I should say. Inevitably will be destroyed. But it's a very particular type of Sith because it's a very particular type of dark side, I should say, character, because there are several types. You know, Kreia is an excellent example of the it's Kreia herself said it best. It's such a quiet thing to fall, and no more worse for it. Um, or I think no less worse. I'm sorry, and no less worse for it. That's what she says. Love that line. You know, and what happened with the Handmaiden's mistress, whose name I can't think of. I'll have to look her up later when I get to KOTOR 2. You know, those two examples are examples of people who do the slow plummet, the slow shift to the point where they don't even recognize it's happening. Then you have someone like Revan, who never actually turns to evil per se, but is instead simply goes to well-intentioned extremist. Darth Vader himself did this for a brief period of time until he went into like a third category. But let's not go into. And of course, we have over here Malik, and I'm not going to go into other examples of Malik because Malik himself is the example of this, the blunt instrument, the man who simply has a ton of power personally and just uses it to take over and blow up things that get in his way because he can. And there's no real goal there. There's no real overarching plan. There's no great intellect behind him, and there doesn't need to be. While all of this sounds like insults, ultimately that type of villain serves an excellent type of villain in its own right. I usually call this the Voldemort example, but that's actually not correct because Voldemort himself was brilliant. But ultimately, when you have that kind of character who just uses just raw brute force and nothing else, and just happens to be strong enough to pull it off, and makes mistakes constantly, and screws up constantly, and kills his own people constantly. You know, if you had the 100 list of what not to do as a villain, this type of villain makes every single mistake on that list. And the only reason they keep going when they're written properly, like Malik was because they are just that strong personally to brute force their way through their own mistakes, knowingly or otherwise. And they're so strong that they can they get to the point, and Deke Malik himself did this, where he just starts blaming other people for his mistakes, and he just keeps being, nope, you failed me, nope, you failed me, nope, you failed me, get out of my way. Malik would be the worst kind of boss to have. Let's just put it that way. And I can speak that from experience. But anyways, and but either way, my point here is that both Saul and Malik made an excellent combo of villains, and Malik himself was the perfect type of villain to be put up against a character like Revan, who was more powerful and much more intelligent and much more wise, and that's important. He wasn't just smarter; he was more wise. He was more competent. He was more well thinking. He knew what he was doing and he knew how to do it and did it properly. And so it's an excellent contrast between the two, and it really brings out the dichotomy of the two. And again, Malik had an excellent death scene, which he deserved, in my opinion. You know, it ends, no matter how you do it, it ends as I always knew it would, in darkness. Wonderful last words there. Now, I should probably see how long this video has gotten up to. Oh my goodness. Okay, a couple other things I want to cover. First of all, the music in KOTOR. I could be mistaken on this. Previous to KOTOR, all the Star Wars games used clips or remakes or remixes or remasterings or whatever of the actual music from Star Wars. You know, the actual score John Williams made. KOTOR was the first game that would use some snippets like that, but actually had their own music done in the style of Star Wars music, which again was another thing that had basically been a first. That is done more often now. Tor itself does that as well, and KOTOR 2 did, and several other games did that. But that's an excellent thing to do, and really added to the flavor and indeed the feeling of the scene when you have what sounds like Star Wars music but isn't, and therefore gives you the feeling that this is Star Wars yet not, or rather, it is Star Wars but it's not Star Wars. It's not the trilogy. This is just the setting. It really added to it, in my opinion, and it really helped flesh out the individual scenes. I've always felt music is such an important aspect to a video game, and it really added to KOTOR, in my opinion. Let's see. Is there anything else I want to add here? Um, Goodness. Let's look at my list here really quick. I apologize. Talked about that. Talked about that. One of the last things I wanted to add here is the how do I put this? One of the things KOTOR did very well was had an appropriate it had an appropriate scope to the story. And actually, there's one other thing I'm going to add after this. That is to say, while it didn't do the Baldur's Gate 2 thing of this, what it instead did was the plateau system, where it's like this, and then you have a reveal, and then it goes up, and then you have another reveal, and it goes up, and it keeps doing this basically until you realize what the Starforge really is. Not just a giant factory that can make ships. No, no, what the Starforge really was. And that's the point at which you realize the true threat this thing has to the galaxy as a whole, and why it needs to be stopped, why it needs to go away, why you need to destroy it. And they did that really well. You know, you start off, the threat is the people who are after Bastila and that, and then Terrace gets destroyed. What? And I also I want to comment on this really quickly. At first, one might be suspected that that's just taking on the Alderaan idea and carrying it forward, but it was done so differently and for such different reasons that I think it qualifies as a different concept and a different way of doing it. It gets points, is my point, is what I'm saying here. It was well done, in my opinion, because the rather than simply blowing up a planet like that with a super weapon, what actually ends up happening is for the next several hours, the ships just bombard the surface. And indeed, this is what will happen. And this is true in lore. This is true previous to KOTOR. You know, the Imperial fleet, for example, in Star Wars canon, or indeed any real fleet of any sufficient size, can just sit there and bombard a planet for several hours or days, and that planet will be rubble by the time they're done. You know, the base Delta Zero. And yes, I'm a total geek for knowing the command code for that. But, you know, that type of thing is something that already existed. So that was a different feel than what happened in Alderaan. And indeed, as we saw, as we see, I should say, in Tor, Terrace was not completely obliterated. It was just reduced to rubble, and the society was wiped out. I know that's all that happened. But it was an excellent impact point. Really got across not just what the scope was, what the scales had, or I'm sorry, the stakes, what the stakes had become, but also really served as an excellent way to show us who Malik was. That was everything I just talked about Malik was simplified and expressed with that simple action, with that one order. We knew exactly who Malik was as a villain, and it was a very effective way of getting that across. And then, of course, we go start finding the Starforge pieces and try to put together the mystery. And there was a degree of mystery there. As I said, the plot developed. There was no twists. So as it developed, as it grows, as you learn more, as you understand more, more of it starts to make sense. One of my favorite examples of that, if I might diverge really quickly, is Kashyyyk. When you get down there and you encounter the Rataki, or whatever it's called, the ancient race of the Infinite Empire hologram, and he asks you a puzzle question in order to get through. And it becomes obvious very quickly, if you're paying any attention at all, that you are supposed to give dark side answers, or evil answers, as the case may be. And I do make the distinction. And that simple fact was an excellent way in gameplay to really develop the story, really give you a very strong feeling. It's the oh god, or actually it's the oh crap moment, to be honest with you, because it's that moment when things haven't actually gone bad yet, and you don't actually know what's happening yet, but you get this hint of it, and you realize all of a sudden it's just oh crap, or oh god if you prefer. Oh god, we don't even know what's. Oh my goodness, and it's just that moment, it was very well done. And again, that pushed it up another notch here on the overall scope of the plot. And then when it gets to the part where you actually find out you're Revan, everything makes a whole lot more sense. And again, it wasn't really that much of a surprise, but it really put the pieces together. And then he takes Bastila, and then all of a sudden you have a problem. And the stakes are, in my opinion, raised again because KOTOR was also a very personal game, as indeed most Bioware games are. And by that point, I actually cared about Bastila. I actually wanted to help that character. I wanted to help that person. I consider her someone who was relevant. I don't know how better to say this. I'm not saying I had a crush on her, is what I'm saying. I'm saying that she was awesome, and I needed to go save her. Damn it! And so I was in quite a bit of a rush to do so, and it was, rush to the planets, get there, let's go, we need to figure out where she is now. We need to help her, because she's being tortured, and they keep showing me cutscenes of her being tortured. Damn it, let's go. Um, and so I just really think the structure of the story was very well done for the style of it, for the scope of it. Because again, in Star Wars has never done this, or at least it rarely has done this. What it has done is this. And the best example I could give you right now, if you've read the books at all, is the Thrawn trilogy, which very, very effectively did this. And I point to the end of the second book as the example of that. When the Republic was it was already doing poorly, and the battles were already doing poorly, and everything was already doing poorly. And then right at the end, like the last page of the book, you find out about the clones, and then that's the oh god moment right there. It's just oh God, because the scope of what you're facing and how much worse than things are than you thought they were just hits you right that moment. To be continued next book. And then again, just this leap up in the plateau. And Star Wars has always done that. So the fact that KOTOR did that again gives us that feel of Star Wars without being Star Wars. They just kept doing that in gameplay and story. It was very well done. I'm going to stop talking about this game. No, wait, no, I'm not. There's one last thing I want to talk about, and that is the fact that KOTOR really did set a precedent in terms of. I kind of talked about this at the beginning, as sort of as an askance, but what KOTOR did, aside from setting the precedent of the Xbox and all that, and ending the Star Wars curse, it showed LucasArts, it showed the people in general, the gamers, and it showed us Star Wars fans that a Star Wars game could still be amazing, that you could still do great Star Wars games. And in my opinion, showing it working like that is much better than saying it could be. It could be that Dragon Age 3 will be great. It could be. When Dragon Age 3 comes out, we will see whether it is or not, and my statement has almost no impact compared to what Dragon Age 3 will be. If Dragon Age 3 actually is great, then that will be a statement right there. But me saying it might be great doesn't mean much. Someone saying back then a Star Wars game could be great didn't mean much because we all knew that. KOTOR being amazing changed the playing field, and so I have to give that game its props for that. Now, most unfortunately, I don't know if I have time to do another review of KOTOR 2. I do have a couple more things I need to get done before I can get started. So I'm going to go ahead and upload this and get my work done, and if, God willing, I will go ahead and get my KOTOR 2 review done tonight. So I'll see you soon.